Chances are, if you've clicked this video, you're an aspiring composer who's currently scouring the internet in hopes that you'll finally crack the code for writing the music you've been dying to write. You may have spent hours watching tutorials in hopes that at least one of them will provide you an answer that will take you from being, well, slightly suckish to pretty decent at writing music. But hear me out. If you haven't found the answer you're looking for, it's only because you're not looking in the right place. The secret to writing the music that you want to write isn't something that you can find by knowing more things. And I get it, it might sound contradictory to what you think. But hoarding more knowledge is like putting a band-aid over the core issue and becomes a distraction from what really needs to be addressed. But before we go any further, I should probably introduce myself. My name is Gabe, the audio architect. I'm a video game composer and content creator on a mission to help musical minds like you level up their creativity. So, welcome to the next few minutes of your life. Maybe you'll laugh, maybe you'll cry, and hopefully learn a few things in the process. So join me on this journey of discovering how to music way better and stuff. Let's get into it. Okay, look, the reason it seems so difficult to get the results you want when it comes to composing music is because the issue starts at the very core of your creative process. The issue isn't going to be solved by learning another technique. It's going to be solved by learning about, well, you. More specifically, what works for you and what doesn't work for you, what you're great at, and what could be better. So, if you could do a little self-reflection, then the rest of what I'm about to tell you will hopefully make a lot of sense. But in order to move forward with this explanation, we need to take a little field trip to the past. Okay, yeah, definitely went a little too far back. I actually meant to end up here, in Boston, where I had the good fortune to be able to study at Berklee College of Music. Berklee is a contemporary music school that offers just about anything you want to learn as a musician. Those were the days. I'm gonna do a little reminiscing montage here if that's okay with you. That's why I got my reminiscing beard on. Anyways, like I was saying. Yes, it was like it was yesterday. I can still smell the toxic fumes emanating from the 200 first semester students as they smoked outside of the dorms, discussing which one of them was the true inheritor of John Mayer's dorm room. And there I was, attempting to study amidst the cacophony of bedroom saxophone players, practicing jazz licks in different keys simultaneously. But despite the very deliberate coordinated saxophone assault on my eardrums, I was beginning to come to a wonderful and yet terrible realization. Knowing things is cool, but it doesn't necessarily determine the quality of music you create. Being in an environment where I was offered so much knowledge so readily made me realize early on that even though I had all this theoretical knowledge rattling around in my brains, I had absolutely no understanding of my creative process. Therefore, my ability to effectively translate my thoughts into audible things was inconsistent at best. Sometimes I achieved the results I wanted, and sometimes I didn't. But more importantly, I'd yet to learn why this was the case. So, with many questions and not really a whole lot of answers, I set off on an epic quest in attempts to truly understand my creative process. That quest grind spanned many levels, and through many different zones. But I think that I might have found my answer. Or at least I'm getting somewhat closer to finding an answer. So after a great deal of experimentation and introspection, I learned that every time you acquire a new musical technique, it becomes a tool on your proverbial tool belt, but it doesn't actually determine the results you end up with. It's the way you use those tools within the context of your creative process that is actually what ensures results. For this reason, there needs to be an emphasis on developing awareness around the creative process as a whole and not solely acquiring more tools as a means to an end. But what does it mean to understand the creative process as a whole? It's a pretty good question. I'm glad you asked. You see, creativity as a whole is made up of two fundamental parts, the structural part and the spontaneous part. So the answer that I found through my exploration was that if I find a way to balance structure with spontaneity, then I can optimize my creative process and more often than not achieve the results that I want in a much shorter amount of time. When you step back and you zoom out and you look at things from a broader perspective, you'll find that every struggle you face as a composer results from being out of balance with one side of this creative spectrum. For example, you might be a composer who feels an inspiration, opens up their DAW, and can let their creativity soar for 8 whole measures maybe, and then your mojo is no-mo. and you're left with yet another unfinished piece and the same degree of frustration. On the other hand, you might be a max-level music theory wizard who gets so caught in analysis paralysis that you find it impossible to make a simple decision. Alright, so those are the issues that we face as composers, but how do we actually solve them? Again, pretty good question. I'm glad you asked. Think about it like this. Imagine water being poured into an empty jar. The jar is the structure created by your workflow, and the water is the flow of your musical ideas. Water in of itself doesn't have a particular shape. It can only ever adhere to the shape of its container. And therefore, to get the water, or in this case, the flow of your ideas, to come out in a certain way, you need to have a structure to pour into. And you also need to know how to change the structure shape in order to get different results. You solve this by introducing enough of a structured framework into your workflow to eliminate indecision while simultaneously adapting your framework to allow for the unexpected. Now, this is by no means something you can figure out overnight. It's going to be a quest grind, and you'll need to cultivate a certain degree of self-awareness to identify where you are on the creative spectrum at any given moment. Here's a couple of suggestions that will help. If you start a lot of ideas but struggle to finish them, try using a reference track. Reference tracks are hugely beneficial as they provide a roadmap to follow. Good reference material can eliminate indecision because you're mimicking ideas that actually already capture your goal. The proper way to use a reference track is to find the music that you love that contains examples of what you struggle with but does it really well, and then emulate those techniques you've learned in your own composition. Whether you struggle with song structure, finding the right instruments for your arrangement, writing transitions, or chord progressions, a reference track can be a huge game changer. So that's one way of introducing structure into your workflow. Another way is to make sure your DAW is set up for success. You can organize your DAW to allow the most fluidity while composing. One way of doing this is through creating instrument templates. You can create templates that capture a specific mood, genre, or even general tonal quality. Creating templates is an excellent way of saving yourself tons of time trying to figure out what instruments work together, which over time can really kill the vibe if you're inspired and want to roll with it. These are just two examples of how you can begin to introduce structure and strategy into your creative process, which increases the likelihood of consistency and success. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how you format your workflow, as long as it achieves three primary things. 1. It's systematic. This means that it's a repetitive process that produces consistent results. 2. It helps you manage the intricate details of your composition. When not managed properly, it can make you feel rather overwhelmed, stopping you from making any progress on your piece. 3. It needs to provide quick solutions to creative problems. So have a reference track ready and create a roadmap for your piece before you start. Gather whatever resources you need beforehand to draw inspiration and direction from. If you follow this general framework and incorporate these concepts into your workflow, you'll be putting the days of countless unfinished 8-bar loops behind you, or at least graduate to the days of countless unfinished 16-bar loops, which is still one step closer to the goal. In my previous videos, I demonstrate how a lot of these concepts work in the context of composing an original composition. When you're done with this video, watch those videos as they might be helpful to you. Also, if you haven't already, please consider hitting those like, subscribe, and bell icons, and sign up for my newsletter by going to my website for free video game music and other slightly interesting content that I send out weekly. Now, let's address the other side of the creative spectrum.
As a studied and scholarly musician,
I know from experience that it's common for knowledge to hinder the creative process if you're not careful. Most of us who struggle with letting go of what we know go back and forth editing the same 10 seconds of music. We do this in hopes that we might find the variation of notes or whatever it may be that makes the most sense.
well, my good sir, here's the thing about that.
And I'm speaking to myself here first and foremost. Music isn't always about making sense. It's about making decisions because they just feel right. So if you struggle with analysis paralysis, you need to go back to the basics. Forget the things you know, sit with your instrument, and compose without expectation. Remember why you got into music in the first place, and lean into that feeling of newness and discovery. When you approach the creative process with a beginner's mind, you're able to explore new ways of creating music that might be outside of your comfort zone. This can help you break free from patterns and habits that keep you resistant to change. It's easy to feel that there's no point in changing when you find a way of making music that works. However, if you never recreate your approach over time, you'll lose the ability to generate new ideas. This is why I mentioned earlier that the framework you create with your workflow needs to adapt and evolve with your creative self-expression. And the only way to evolve is to experiment with things that you will most certainly suck at first and will most certainly be highly uncomfortable. So that's how you can begin to find the balance between structure and spontaneity in your creative process. So which side of the creative spectrum do you find yourself on? And what steps are you currently taking to balance your workflow? I would love to know in the comments how I can help you with my content so that you can get closer to your goals. So, venture forth into the mysterious world of music. Learn what you're gonna learn, but learn about you first and foremost. I promise you that if you do equip at least some of this info into your gear slots, you're gonna get some serious stats. I'm talking like at least plus 10 being not as bad, plus 15 halfway decent, and plus 25 making music stuff way better and stuff. Oh, and while you're here, check out a few of these other videos on my channel. Thanks for watching. I'm wishing you all the best on your musical journey, and I promise that with a little faith and persistence, and a whole lot of patience to sit through the countless hours of inevitable frustration, you will achieve the musical and creative goals that you desire. So until next time, stay beautiful and stay blessed.